Welcome back from break. I hope everybody used this time to make some really good connections. I'd now like to introduce our next presentation. Caroline Palmer is the Safe Harbor Program Director with the Minnesota Department of Health. And Bobby Joe, I didn't ask. Pazdernik, sorry, I was going to check with you before saying your name. They're both here to talk about this important topic, and I'll just stop right now and ask you to give them a warm welcome.
How's the volume now? Is that better? Good? Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. And again, my name is Caroline Palmer. I am the new Safe Harbor Program Director. I'm about 3 months in, and I've been enjoying every minute of it. Thank you so much to everybody who has helped to make me feel so welcome in this position, too. And I look forward to getting to know more of you. And I'm really pleased to be doing this presentation with Bobby Jo Pazdernik from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And she is here representing the perspectives of the Trafficking Task Force working on a statewide level. Today we're going to be talking about a new law, FOSTA, SESTA, and I'll explain to you what exactly that means in just a couple of moments. Our focus today is really going to be on what FOSTA, SESTA is, and its implications in particular for investigations having to do with trafficking. There are a lot of different ways we can talk about FOSTA, SESTA, but we're kind of keeping a very narrow perspective today on how it's been helpful to victim survivors and how law enforcement has responded. So we're just going to take a brief background overview. I'm going to talk about some of the key aspects of the law, its implications, and then Bobby Jo will jump up here and talk about the law enforcement response, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for you if you have any questions. So there are really two bills that came into play, which is why we have two names for this law. One was FOSTA, which came out of the House of Representatives in Congress, and it was allowing states and victims to fight online sex trafficking act. On the federal level, they like to create long names with acronyms. And sometimes we do that on the state level too, but a lot on the federal level. And SESTA, which was in the Senate, which was Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. And so what happened is you had aspects of the SESTA language added on to the FOSTA language, and then that became a full vehicle for the law that was signed into law on actually April 11th, 2018. So we're still really dealing with a very new piece of law right now, and we're all of us, looking for implications that come from new laws. Sometimes it takes a while for those implications to come forward, and sometimes we see them right away, which is what we're going to learn today about FOSTA SESTA. So each particular bill had a particular point of view as they were coming through each body of Congress. So SESTA was really originally intended to support victims of trafficking so they could have their own legal recourse if they were harmed in some way online by sex trafficking. Now, we all know about Backpage, of course. That was the biggest case where this was coming into play. And I'll talk more about Backpage in a moment. But Backpage, I think, really started the whole conversation about victim survivors having the opportunity to go forward and find some legal remedies when they were harmed in that particular venue. Also, what SESTA did is it focused on trafficking of children and youth, and also sex trafficking through force, fraud, and coercion, as well as participation in a venture. If a website was participating in the venture of sex trafficking. Now, I want you to really take a moment here and remember force, fraud, and coercion are the requirements that our federal law uses with regard to trafficking when adults are the victims. Under age 18, they don't require force, fraud, and coercion, but over 18, they do on the federal level. In the state of Minnesota, we don't have that requirement. But I just want to make that really clear so you know this is a federal law we're talking about, and they're using the federal language. The other extremely important piece of this particular bill was it created civil liability for internet providers that knowingly advertised people being trafficked. So that was assisting, supporting, facilitating in some way. Again, that's going to get us back to Backpage in a moment about that knowing aspect. And then FOSTA was actually pretty similar to SESTA when it was first introduced, but the big change that came in FOSTA, which has really opened the door to a lot of conversations, is an amendment was added during the House Judiciary hearing that broadened the bill to include advertising of prostitution on websites more generally. So it expanded the actual original focus from just being on trafficking to more of a prostitution approach as well. So we'll talk more about how that has had implications in our communities. Any questions so far? Okay. So back to Backpage for a moment. Backpage, of course, for several years was the subject of a number of investigations. And we know that Backpage was a place where a lot of trafficking was occurring. And the federal government was actively investigating them. The Department of Justice was actively investigating. Congress had them up to testify on many levels. And so before FOSTA SESTA was signed into law in April 2018, we actually did have the closure of Backpage, and we did have arrests. So we had the FBI, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the Internal Revenue Service, all the services came together and came down on Backpage. And at that point then, their CEO pled guilty to money laundering and conspiracy to facilitate prostitution. A number of other folks that were engaged with Backpage are currently under investigation, and this is a long-term act that's been going on. So the one thing to be really clear about that sometimes people get confused on is FOSTA SESTA didn't bring down Backpage. That was occurring long before FOSTA SESTA came into place. Now, FOSTA SESTA may have been inspired by what was going on with Backpage, but Backpage really was before all of this. And what I've got up here is the notice that was put up on Backpage once they had been seized by the federal government and shut down. And that was a really important step, I think, in how we addressed online trafficking issues, because Backpage was so prevalent in use throughout the country. So we kind of break this down then to the key aspects of the law. So the purpose of FOSTA SESTA was to give federal and state law enforcement and prosecutors new tools to go into websites where sex is sold and provide legal remedies for victims. And Bobby Jo, when she gets up here in a few minutes, is going to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like here on the state level. I'm not going to go into all the impacts on the various parts of the law, but the one piece that you really need to be aware of is a lot of this centers around the Communications Decency Act. And that is an act that's been in place actually since the 1930s. And then there were some changes in 1996 where there was also some important litigation that occurred. But essentially what this does is it says that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. And so what this said essentially, and this is what Backpage used for so many years, is to say under this particular section of the Communications Decency Act, you can't hold us liable for whatever somebody is putting up online. We're protected by this particular section of this law. So the impact of FOSTA SESTA was to change this section of the law. So in a lot of ways it operated as a shield, for better or for worse. And the one reason why I say for better is the one thing we want to make sure we're doing when we're talking about internet is that we don't go so broad that we make it so that we can't access information that is really important and is helpful, things like that. So we want to be able to have some protections for use online, but we certainly don't want to have our online access being used to traffic and harm people. So this is always the big balancing act that we have to do in the area of internet. We hear about that all of the time. We want to, for example, make sure that young people could go online and get information about comprehensive sexual health education. We don't want that to be blocked, but we want to make sure they're not at risk of being trafficked. So always this difficulty. What we started to see when FOSTA SESTA was being promoted in Congress is other websites started to take notice. They certainly saw what happened to Backpage, and then Craigslist started to notice what was going on. And so this is a notice that actually popped up in the spring on Craigslist. And so this is before it was signed into law, but they started to notice that we're going to have problems here on Craigslist too. Now, what I've heard from people is Craigslist is still being used. But at the time, back in the spring, they were starting to realize that they needed to make some changes as well. Again, we'll get into more of the implications on the long term for sites. But others were starting to take notice, and they saw that they were going to need to make some changes. So this is what required under FOSTA SESTA. Websites can be prosecuted if they knowingly engage in, conspire, or attempt to promote or facilitate the prostitution of another person. So that was what happened when those two versions merged together. This is what we came up with. Fines and or imprisonment of not more than 10 years. The biggest thing here, and this is so positive for victims, is it provided an avenue to sue that didn't exist there before. And so I don't know if anybody has heard of any cases yet. I'm sure they're probably only in the very beginning stages of talking about those right now. But I think over the next few years, we're going to see victims coming forward and suing using this particular law in order to get recourse for what happened to them online. And I think that's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. There were enhanced penalties, fines or imprisonment up to 25 years for aggravated circumstances. So that's if a site is promoting or facilitating the prostitution of 5 or more persons, setting up a ring, or acts with reckless disregard that such conduct contributes to sex trafficking. So these are the sort of framework that we're working with now under the law. So what we need to really be aware of, though, is data matters. And we know, particularly in the work that we've been doing, that sometimes data is used in ways that can be misleading. And so we want to make sure that when we hear people say, for example, that FOSTA SESTA has cut the numbers down of online advertising, that we look at that very, very skeptically, because that's actually not quite the truth at all. It's shifted. And again, Bobby Joe is going to tell you about that. So there was actually a really great article in the Washington Post Fact Checker column a couple of months ago. So they got the analytics from Telfinder, which is essentially looking at the dark web and all the activity that's going on in the web in general. And so they looked at the behavior and connections that were happening related to FOSTA SESTA during last spring and then up until more recent months. So the first thing they saw is that the biggest drop came after Backpage was shut down. So everybody was like, oh my gosh, we got to do something about this. We're all going to change how we react. Worldwide ads had a daily average of 105,000 on March 21st when FOSTA SESTA passed in Congress. And then it dropped by April 5th when Backpage actually was closed down. And then it dropped again even further right after FOSTA SESTA was signed into law. So, okay, we saw some impacts here. Okay, by August 2018, traffic was back up by 75% because people are really clever. And the law is slow. The law is particularly slow when it comes to telecommunications. So one thing that they are trying to determine now as they look at the data is how much of this is determining whether the sites have actual conduct yet, or if the advertising is up, how much is actual advertising and how much is just getting ready for advertising. Some terms have been changed, like Skype, Reddit, and Craigslist have changed their terms to ban advertising sex, but again, we know it's happening in different ways. Other sites have emerged, such as Twitter. That's operating from countries where selling sex is legal. As of June, they had more than 100,000 members. There's BedPage, and there's lots of other ones that are coming up that are filling in the void. And then recruitment through dating sites such as Plenty of Fish. So again, people figure out ways to get around laws, and they did it very, very quickly. So this is we all know Rachel Lloyd, of course. She's been in Minnesota quite a bit. And she said, I think anyone who said Backpage shutting down would make a real impact on commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking was naive at best. And that's frustrating, right? Because we all want to make changes. I think it just shows us really we have to be on our toes as much as everybody who's doing the trafficking is always a step ahead. That's the challenge with it. So these are some of the really key implications I wanted to go over with regard to FOSTA SESTA. So great things are happening. Larger websites remove their content due to risk of liability. And smaller websites actually folded because they didn't have the means that the larger websites did in order to keep going and have other types of businesses in place. It removed the shield of legal protection from websites facilitating and profiting from sex trafficking children and youth. No more Backpage being able to stall litigation for years and years. And so key, more legal options for survivors. And then finally, it really focuses on websites allowing the unlawful content, not the individuals who are posting. So if you look at the language that's under FOSTA SESTA, it really is organizationally focused. I know that there are some people who are really concerned about it being individually focused, but it really is focused on the websites themselves. But there are some other key implications we need to be thinking about. First of all, there are safety concerns that have been raised by self-identified sex workers that this does hinder their ability to screen johns or share information about offenders, and they are concerned about potential individual liability. There are concerns that law drives sex trafficking underground and increases challenges for law enforcement investigations, which Bobby Joe will talk about. We still have the First Amendment issues that come up, and hence there's already been a lawsuit. And so that lawsuit is based on Reno versus ACLU, which was when the Communications Decency Act was challenged back in the 1990s. And so what you're going to see is people coming forward and saying that the law is too broad, that it's going beyond its original intent to address trafficking. So that is probably take a while to work its way up through the courts. I fully expect this is the kind of thing that will eventually end at the United States Supreme Court because of the complexity around it, but that's going to take a few years before that happens. So I'm going to turn things over to Bobby Joe.
Good morning. As Caroline said, my name is Bobby Joe. I'm the commander of the statewide Human Trafficking Investigators Task Force that is housed at the BCA. So we have statewide jurisdiction and work all throughout the state of Minnesota, which is challenging in itself. So when Caroline called me and said, hey, I'm doing this presentation the day after vacation, and I was wondering if you could come and talk about how FOSTA SESTA has affected human trafficking investigations. I said, Caroline, you don't need me there because I can sum it up in 2 words: extremely difficult. She said I had to come anyways. So here I am. Seriously though, that time period in April when the Backpage investigation was going on, there was all kinds of media activity around FOSTA SESTA. My group was in panic mode. I was in panic mode because our investigations were all surrounding the main points where, right, sex for money is being advertised, mainly Backpage and Craigslist. What are we going to do when they go down? There's software programs, there's companies that had these great tools for investigative avenues that crawled these sites. We could get all kinds of information on a telephone number, on an image that matched up all throughout the country. What are we going to do when it's gone? Did we think for 1 minute that the traffickers were going to stop preying on our children and on victims? No. Did we think sex trafficking was going to stop? No. So it was a day in April, it was on a Friday, and I think it just came out that the CEOs of Backpage were arrested and FOSTA SESTA was gearing up for signing, and I told my team, whatever evidence you need from Backpage, get it downloaded, get DVDs made because we probably only have a day or 2 left. Well, it was that afternoon. The death screen came up. Caroline had it up here. It was Backpage is seized. For us, that was like the stock market had crashed. That was a bad day for us in our office and all throughout our state. So we kind of left defeated, that Friday, and in panic again. What are we going to do? Returned on Monday. I don't remember what I Googled. I Googled something like sex for money or whatever it was. And BedPage popped up. I'm like, oh, great, we got something to go for here. So we thought, well, maybe this is going to be the up and coming. BedPage didn't really take off. It's still there. It's still being operated, but there's not very many sex buyers or victims that are being posted on BedPage. Sorry, I missed where the clicker was. So really, I broke down how this is affecting our investigations 2 ways. What we used to have and what we have now. So what we used to have was consistency in postings, right? If somebody said Backpage, probably everyone in the room would go, okay, yep, I know what that is. It's clearly sex is being advertised for money. Craigslist, when you were talking specifically about the personal ads, the ads were pretty raunchy and you knew that sex was being advertised for money. So we lost those two things. And when we lost that, we lost the law enforcement response to subpoenas. And those subpoena responses were magical for our investigations. Backpage, I'm sorry, but we loved Backpage responses. We'd get 100 pages from one subpoena. There was just a ton of information that we could use, one, to identify victims, and two, to identify their traffickers. That's gone. We don't get responses from very many websites anymore. So what we have now, numerous websites, like popping up every day, all over the world. Many of them are overseas in other countries where prostitution is legal, and or the countries will not respond to our subpoenas. So we are having an extremely difficult time identifying victims and identifying traffickers and identifying where everybody went, because there's so many and they're dispersed all across hundreds of websites. And we have been working since that day in April, the death screen, to try to figure out. I talked to people like Terry from Breaking Free. She's been helpful in talking to some of the victims that go through there and trying to figure out where are they posting now. They didn't go away. They're still posting. We are just having a really hard time trying to figure out where they are. And it's different geographically. So what we figured out for Minneapolis, St. Paul area is not the same for, we just did a juvenile demand suppression down in Worthington, which the biggest city down there is about 200,000, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So when I called down to that southwest corner and said, hey, where are the victims being posted? Where are the sex buyers advertising? We have no clue. Okay, I'll call Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Sioux City, Iowa, try to figure out where their teams are finding the sex ads. Commander of the Sioux Falls City Human Trafficking Task Force. We have no clue. I said, great, well, we're coming down, so any help you guys could give us would be wonderful. They had nothing for us, so we were kind of blindly going down there because all the sites that we were using up here, there was probably like 2 posts in a weekend, so we really struggled. We went down there, and we did the best we could, and we did find some sites where they were being posted, and we did make some arrests, but a lot of resources right now is being put into trying to figure out where the advertisement is going to and where it's going to go to next, right? Because every time you go into one of these websites, another 5 pops up, and it tells the sex buyers and the traffickers, go here, go here. And so it's kind of chaotic and out of control. And then again, very few of these news sites, and the most popular ones, at least in Minneapolis, are responding to any subpoenas. Most of them are overseas. And then we have social media. That sucks. Hate it. Social media is a nightmare because now we have our sex traffickers on these sites posting their victims on the same sites that our kids are on, and that somebody who wants to actually find love and for real find romance, right? They're on the dating sites because they think they're going to find Mr. or Mrs. right there, intermingled with our traffickers. And then we have the traffickers recruiting our kids on those sites because our kids think that they need to be on these sites and find love for whatever reason on Match.com or Plenty of Fish. So what they do on these sites, the traffickers or the sex workers, they secretly post sex for money, because if they outright said, 1 hour for $150, whatever, their account would be terminated, would be shut down. So they do all these cute little, signs and sayings that a regular sex buyer is going to recognize and go, okay, I know what this is about, how much for what. But the guys that are really out there looking for love, they have no idea, and then they get caught up in this, well, is this really Mrs. Right, or she just wants my $150? So that's kind of a mess. And then, like I said, the kids are on there. And no, they shouldn't be on there, but they are. And then the really unfortunate thing, even like when talking to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, they said all of our victims have gone back to the track. I said, well, I don't think they've all gone back to the track, but we're hearing it a lot up here too, where there is no real good place to post because it's so spread out. So the victims are being sent back to the street. And we all know that that is extremely dangerous for all of us. So just a couple of slides to show you what we lost. I mean, when we got subpoena responses, we got phone numbers, we got emails, we got telephone numbers. And you know what, you can try to hide as much as you want, but once in a while, these phone numbers are going to be used for a Facebook account or, going to be used to pay for some sort of electrical bill or whatever. It was gold to us, and we don't have that anymore. So where have they gone? This is after several months of several analysts working on a regular basis to try to track where the advertisements have gone. And this clearly is not all of them. This is just the majority of what we have been seeing in the metro area. Not down in southwestern Minnesota. None of these work down there. And we've been in northern Minnesota, and we've found the same thing. So struggling to keep up with the movement. But you can see a lot of these websites alone are housed out of country. And then the social media sites. If you have kids, they probably have some of these apps on their phone. And it's dating websites. It's, Meet Me was originally supposed to be for I think it was supposed to be for college friends, and then it ended up being for high school friends, but locate friends in your area type thing. Meet Me is out of control. If I have an undercover account on Meet Me, within a very short period of time, I have 1,000 friends, and probably 999 of them are males. And they are looking for not to be my friend, put it that way. So that's all I have. I probably could have got away with the extremely difficult, but here I am. Thank you.
So any questions for Bobby, Joe, and I? There's a couple, so probably should stay up here.
If it's hard for you, then how hard is it for buyers to find these sites?
It's not hard at all because, like I said, if you can go to one site, you've got 5 other sites that are popping up. They are always going to be able to find sex for money, but they're all dispersed. So they might not be as picky as they used to be, because when you used to go to Backpage, whatever number you had up there, 100,000 posts or whatever it was, you could be selective about, who you got to choose. Now you might have 5 posts on each site.
saw. Go ahead.
You mentioned that there were a list of things that buyers would use or would recognize on those sites. Do you have a list of those things available?
No, but we could probably make a list. A lot of them are done in emojis, cute little types of things.
Can you speak a little bit more about, I know that there have been a lot of people who self-identify as sex workers who are really upset at SESTA and FOSTA, and there's a lot of pushback around that. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, there has been, and that's probably a much longer presentation than we could do today. But essentially, the two things that they've raised concerns about, well, and actually a few others that Bobby Jo has raised as well, is being pushed back out onto the streets as part of it, and being concerned about the ability to advertise online, using online services in order to share information about dangerous Johns. They've found out as a particular safety risk that they've run into. And I think overall just some fear about being increasingly targeted for their activities. So I was actually at a recent trafficking conference, and there was a presentation really put up forward by that perspective and some of the ways that they are concerned for their own safety.
I think there was one here first and then.
One here and then one.
I was just wondering if you have heard about advertisement being right in children's games. We had heard about it when I was in Florida, but I've never seen any, and I didn't know how true it was. But there, I guess once the juvenile goes on the page to play a game, then there's like a back door that they can go on, and they're advertised there.
I have heard of games as being a source of trafficking and recruitment. Bobby Jo may have some more information towards that, but that is something that I think has been going on. Gaming in general actually is a pretty inhospitable world to many people, and particularly women and girls. It's a lot of sexual harassment, bullying, leading to actual sexual assault occurs there, and certainly trafficking has been part of that as well. I don't know if you've run into anything in particular.
Yeah, and like she said, the whole gaming part, anything that is web-based and has a chat to it, predators are on it looking for kids, and they can advertise, they can, start grooming. Well, and it's not just kids. I mean, there's a lot of adults that are gamers too. I guess we focus a lot on minors. But yes, very dangerous, and definitely a place to recruit and to be advertising.
Hello. I have a question about mailing list, because even though Backpage has been shut down, but before it was shut down, it could have been possible that they were capturing the traffickers' emails, so they send them information about girls that are available. Are you able to investigate mailing lists and find out if they have lists of traffickers that they still send information to, even though there is no website? Thank you.
Are you talking about the sex buyers?
Yes.
So the sex buyers we cannot identify from places like Backpage, because the advertisements go up and there's a telephone number, and the sex buyers then contact that telephone number.
Yeah, I meant, for example, like capturing people's emails. So on Backpage, it could have been that they had ways to capture the buyer's emails. So they keep a mailing list. That list is not on their website. That list is somewhere else, like with a third party's website, and they could even download it on their computer and have that list hosted locally on their computer. And they can still email all those people and give them information about girls that are available for services. So my question was, what are you doing? Or have you thought about investigating even mailing lists to see if they had a mailing list? And that's the way you could get information of some of these sex buyers. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's no, when you respond to a Backpage ad, you don't see any sex buyer information. So like Backpage is a public, or was a public website. So anybody could go on Backpage and you don't have to enter in any information. And all you do is browse. So all you do is you see the advertisements. You don't actually respond to them over that particular website. So there's no information going back and forth. The way that we get the information that, for example, that I had up on the screen from the subpoena response is the people that are creating the ads, in order to create the ads, they have to enter in their information, right? Because they have to pay for it. So in order to pay for it, they have to enter in their email, their phone numbers. We capture IP addresses, which helps us identify what location they were using a computer to access that website, and payment information. So it's all on the side of the sex workers and the traffickers that are posting the ads. The way we get the sex buyer information, one, is from doing the demand suppressions, but two, if we are doing recovery details and then we have the phones of these sex workers, then we can recover that through search warrants or through a consent. But as far as through the website, nothing was going through the website.
Are there any more questions? I'm aware of time too, Caroline. I know you're coming up next, so thank you both. This was so important to know.